You have spent too long running after echoes of love that never arrived. You've given pieces of your soul to someone who could not recognize their value, much less yours. And yet, here you are, breathing, standing, alive. That is the proof that your spirit is unbreakable. It is time to see clearly. The chase that once defined your life, that constant seeking of someone else's approval, has blinded you from the truth. Your power was never in their hands. It was never theirs to give or withhold. Your power has always been inside you, quietly waiting, patiently watching, whispering, "You are enough." Understand this: emotional neglect is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of another's incapacity. To absorb their avoidance, to bend your heart toward their indifference, is a courageous act, but it is courage misapplied. True courage is turning inward, reclaiming the love you have been giving away, and pouring it into the one person who will never abandon it: yourself. Boundaries are not walls. They are sacred declarations of your value. They are the language of self-respect. They say, "I will not shrink to accommodate your fear. I will not dim to make you comfortable. I will stand in the fullness of my being." And when you stand there, unwavering, the world begins to respect you. Not because of fear, not because of manipulation, but because the universe honors integrity, and integrity honors itself. Detachment is not loss, it is liberation. To release the desperate need for someone to change, to finally stop trying to fill a void that was never yours to fill, is a sacred act of freedom. It allows your heart to breathe, your soul to expand, and your life to align with what you truly deserve. But the most profound transformation comes from within. Compassion for yourself is the river that washes away the residue of neglect. Self-love is the sunlight that awakens dormant joy. Reflection is the mirror that reveals your infinite worth. When you cultivate these, you no longer chase, you attract. You no longer beg, you magnetize. And finally, understand this truth: the universe mirrors the energy you carry. When you stop running after those who cannot see you and start nurturing the sacred self within, you will find love that is reciprocal, respect that is mutual, and connection that feels like home. The chase ends not in defeat, but in awakening. You step into power not by demanding it, but by embodying it. Rise, Super Empath. Your heart is not fragile, it is luminous. Your soul is not lost, it is sovereign. Beyond the chase lies the life you were meant to live, whole, honored, and free. Stand tall, reclaim your power, and let the world witness the force of a soul that has learned its own value. Awareness is the cornerstone of liberation. Before change can take root, before power can be reclaimed, there must first be recognition, a seeing that pierces through the fog of old patterns. For the super empath who has been caught in the orbit of an avoidant partner, this awareness often comes slowly, like a dawn that creeps over the horizon, subtle but undeniable. It begins with noticing the subtle ways your energy has been drained, the quiet yet persistent tension that arises when your attempts at closeness are met with distance or indifference. It is the recognition that you have been giving more than is returned, that your heart has been stretched towards someone who is unwilling or incapable of meeting you in that space of vulnerability. This awareness is not about blame. It is not about constructing a narrative in which one person is villain and the other victim. It is instead an honest accounting of reality. It is seeing the truth of your emotional investments and how they have been absorbed by a system that cannot or will not reciprocate. For too long, the super empath may have justified the lack of response, rationalized the coldness, or ignored the recurring cycles of avoidance because hope whispered that love could be earned, changed, or coaxed into being. Awareness requires letting go of that illusion, not in anger, not in despair, but in clarity. When you become aware of the pattern, you begin to see the rhythm of your own behavior mirrored in your partner's avoidance. You notice the way you chase, how you bend, how you anticipate their moods, and attempt to fill the spaces they leave empty. You may realize that much of your emotional energy has been devoted to predicting, appeasing, or nurturing someone who is emotionally unavailable. This is not weakness, it is a profound expression of empathy. But without awareness, it becomes a trap, a cycle that repeats, each iteration eroding self-worth and obscuring your own needs. Awareness also requires recognizing the subtle emotional cues you may have ignored or minimized. Perhaps there were moments when your voice was silenced, your feelings dismissed, or your needs relegated to the background. Perhaps you felt anxious, unseen, or persistently uncertain about where you stood, yet you rationalized these feelings, telling yourself that love requires patience, compromise, or sacrifice. Awareness illuminates these moments and invites you to witness them without judgment. It allows you to see not just the avoidance of the other, but the cost to your own emotional ecosystem, the depletion, the exhaustion, the silent eroding of confidence that accompanies repeated neglect. Crucially, awareness is active. It is not passive observation, but a conscious choice to examine the dynamics at play. Journaling, reflection, meditation, and honest conversations with trusted friends or mentors can help surface the hidden truths of your experience. Questions arise. Am I chasing validation that is not mine to claim? Am I investing more energy than is being returned? Am I attempting to fill a void that belongs solely to another? These inquiries are not comfortable, but they are necessary. With awareness comes the first step toward reclaiming power. Recognizing the pattern allows the super empath to separate their self-worth from the behavior of someone else. It creates space to discern what is truly theirs, their feelings, their boundaries, their needs, from what has been unconsciously absorbed from another's avoidance. This clarity is a form of liberation because it illuminates the line between empathy that nurtures and empathy that compromises. It is the foundation upon which all subsequent healing, boundary setting, and self-empowerment are built. In the end, awareness is a quiet revolution within the self. It is the moment when the super empath stops running on autopilot, stops justifying the neglect, and begins to see the truth of their own experience. It is the awakening that signals the start of a journey not defined by chasing someone else's approval, but by honoring the soul's inherent value. Awareness is not the end. It is the light that guides the path toward reclaiming power, towards stepping fully into one's own sovereign heart. Understanding emotional neglect is essential for the super empath who has been entangled with an avoidant partner. Emotional neglect is subtle, often invisible to the outside world, yet its impact is profound. Unlike overt abuse or confrontation, neglect does not leave bruises that can be seen. It leaves echoes in the soul, silent gaps in the heart, and questions that linger long after the interactions have ended. T is the repeated experience of being unseen, unheard, or unvalued, not because one is unworthy, but because the other is emotionally unavailable. Grasping this distinction is critical. Emotional neglect is not a reflection of your inadequacy. It is a reflection of another's incapacity to meet you where you are, to honor your needs, and to respond to your openness with reciprocity. When an empath is exposed to this type of neglect, the impact is subtle at first, almost imperceptible. There is a sense of confusion, of walking on emotional quicksand, never quite knowing what will trigger withdrawal or disinterest. You may notice your words seem to disappear into a void, your vulnerability met with silence or deflection, your efforts to connect returned in partial or inconsistent ways. These experiences are not isolated incidents. They are patterns repeated over time that slowly erode confidence and distort perceptions of self-worth. Over time, the empath may internalize the neglect, believing that their needs are too much, that their heart is burdensome, or that love must be earned rather than freely given. Understanding this dynamic requires honesty with oneself. It demands acknowledging that emotional neglect is not an accident, nor is it a reflection of your value or efforts. It is a consistent pattern of avoidance, withdrawal, and unavailability that signals an inability or unwillingness to engage in a mutually nourishing way. Recognizing this allows the empath to stop questioning themselves and to begin redirecting their energy towards self-preservation and self-nurturing. Awareness alone is not enough. It must be paired with comprehension. The deep insight that emotional neglect leaves a mark not because of who you are, but because of who they cannot be. This understanding also illuminates the broader patterns in relational dynamics. Emotional neglect teaches T. He empath what it feels like to give without return, to invest without acknowledgement, and to love without reciprocity. It makes clear the ways in which the heart can be stretched beyond its natural capacity when it is not met with balance. The empath begins to see that these experiences are not just random misfortunes, but lessons in discernment and self-respect. The neglected heart learns, often painfully, how to distinguish between those who can meet it and those who cannot. Furthermore, grasping the reality of emotional neglect opens the door to healing. It allows the super empath to contextualize their pain, to understand why they feel depleted, anxious, or overly responsible for another's emotional state. It reframes the narrative from one of failure to one of insight. This was not a reflection of weakness, but a mirror showing where boundaries were needed, where self-compassion was delayed, and where the soul's energy had been overextended. By understanding the nature of neglect, the empath can forgive themselves for overgiving, release guilt associated with setting boundaries, and cultivate the internal resources necessary for authentic self-love. Ultimately, understanding emotional neglect is not about dwelling on the past. It is about seeing the relationship for what it truly was, rather than what you hoped it might be. It is about recognizing the inherent dignity and worth of your own heart, independent of another's inability to nurture it. It is the critical step that transforms confusion into clarity, pain into insight, and absence into the fertile ground for rebuilding a resilient, empowered self. Through this understanding, the empath begins the sacred work of restoring balance, reclaiming power, and cultivating a life where love is mirrored, respect is mutual, and emotional presence is no longer optional but inevitable. Claiming personal power is not simply a matter of willpower or determination. It is the profound recognition that your worth has never depended on someone else's attention, validation, or affection. For the super empath who has been entangled with an avoidant partner, power often feels elusive because it has been unconsciously surrendered, piece by piece, in the desperate hope of earning recognition or love. Every compromise, every act of overextending, every moment of bending your spirit to accommodate another has subtly chipped away at the sense of sovereignty that is your birthright. Reclaiming power begins with realizing that it was never theirs to take. It has always resided within you, waiting to be remembered, acknowledged, and exercised. This reclamation starts with awareness, the conscious decision to observe the ways in which you have given away your energy and authority. Perhaps you noticed how your emotions became contingent on their moods, how your decisions were influenced more by their reactions than by your own intentions, or how your boundaries were blurred in the pursuit of connection. Seeing these patterns clearly is the first act of reclaiming power because it allows you to disentangle yourself from the illusion that someone else's presence defines your worth. You begin to understand that power is not about controlling another, but about taking full responsibility for your own emotional landscape and refusing to relinquish it to someone who cannot honor it. Reclaiming personal power also requires a shift in perspective. The recognition that being kind, empathetic, and giving does not require self-sacrifice to the point of depletion. Empathy is a strength, not a weakness, but when it is unconsciously extended to someone who is unavailable, it can become a mechanism for surrendering self-respect. True power is grounded in balance. It is the ability to offer love and care without expecting or needing it to be returned in order to feel worthy. It is the courage to stand firm in your values and boundaries, knowing that your presence in the world is inherently valuable and that your heart deserves reciprocity, not neglect. To reclaim power, the super empath must also confront internalized narratives that have been shaped by years of avoidance and neglect. These might include beliefs such as, I am too much, I must earn love, or if I am patient, they will change. Each of these beliefs subtly erodes autonomy and self-trust. Power is restored when these stories are dismantled, replaced by the truth that you are enough exactly as you are. You do not need to bend, chase, or compromise your essence to earn recognition. Your value is intrinsic. It does not require validation from someone who cannot meet you on equal ground. The practice of reclaiming power is reinforced through intentional actions. Setting and enforcing boundaries, choosing where to invest emotional energy, and prioritizing self-care are not acts of selfishness. They are demonstrations of sovereignty. Each time you honor your needs, each time you resist the pull of someone else's avoidance, you reclaim a fragment of the authority that may have been surrendered in the past. Over time, these actions compound, transforming a sense of depletion into a reservoir of strength. The empath begins to recognize that power is not something to be begged for or stolen. It is cultivated through consistent choices that honor the self. Ultimately, reclaiming personal power is a spiritual act as much as it is emotional or psychological. It is a declaration to the universe and to yourself that your heart is not negotiable, that your soul is sovereign, and that your presence in this life has inherent authority and value. It is the moment when the empath stops chasing, stops justifying another's neglect, and begins to stand fully in the truth of their own worth. Through this reclamation, the super empath discovers a freedom that is both humbling and exhilarating, a freedom to live, love, and create from a place of authenticity, strength, and unwavering self-respect. Setting and enforcing boundaries is not an act of anger or punishment. It is a declaration of self-respect, a sacred acknowledgement of your worth, and a practical step toward reclaiming your power. For the super empath who has been entangled with an avoidant partner, boundaries are often the missing framework that protects energy, preserves emotional health, and communicates value without needing to argue, explain, or justify. Too often, the empath has tolerated behaviors that deplete them, justified the neglect, or rationalized the avoidance in the hope that patience and sacrifice would eventually lead to recognition. Boundaries are the conscious decision to stop this cycle, not as retaliation, but as an act of self-honor. The first step in setting boundaries is clarity. You must know what is acceptable to you and what is not, what aligns with your values and what erodes your sense of self. This requires deep introspection and honesty. Perhaps it means acknowledging that you will no longer chase after someone who withdraws, that your time and energy are not available for manipulation or inconsistency, or that your emotional presence is not a tool to compensate for another's avoidance. The process of defining boundaries is a process of discovering your limits, your non-negotiables, and the spaces in which your heart can thrive without compromise. Once clarity is established, the next step is communication. Boundaries are only effective when they are expressed consciously, respectfully, and consistently. You do not need to justify or explain your boundaries excessively. A simple, firm declaration is sufficient. For example, stating, "I need consistency in communication to feel respected," or "I cannot continue this dynamic where my feelings are dismissed," communicates your value without aggression. It is important to recognize that boundaries are not demands for another to change. They are commitments to yourself. They set the terms by which you will honor your heart and energy, independent of whether the other person complies. Enforcing boundaries requires courage and discipline. One thing to articulate your limits, it is another to stand by them when faced with resistance, guilt-tripping, or attempts to manipulate. The super empath must learn to follow through with their declarations, even when the other reacts with discomfort, anger, or withdrawal. This follow-through is where transformation occurs. Each time you honor your boundary, you reinforce the truth of your worth. Each time you refuse to compromise your emotional integrity, you reclaim a piece of the power that was previously ceded to another. Enforcement is not about winning or punishing. It is about embodying the principle that your heart, time, and energy are sacred and not negotiable. Boundaries are also dynamic. They evolve as you evolve. The super empath may start with smaller boundaries, such as limiting certain types of interactions or protecting emotional availability, and over time expand to larger boundaries, such as disengaging from consistently avoidant relationships. Each boundary is a lesson in self-trust, teaching the empath that their internal compass is reliable and that honoring themselves does not make them selfish, it makes them whole. The spiritual dimension of boundaries cannot be overlooked. They are a reflection of divine principles. Respect for the self mirrors respect for the life force within you. Honoring your needs acknowledges the sacredness of your emotional energy. Boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They are bridges that allow healthy, reciprocal connections to flourish while gently deterring those who cannot meet you on equal terms. They transform relationships from draining patterns into spaces where mutual respect, care, and love are possible. Ultimately, setting and enforcing boundaries is an act of liberation. It signals the end of chasing, the end of compromising your heart for someone else's limitations. It teaches the empath that their power resides in their ability to protect their emotional ecosystem, to choose what they allow into their life, and to honor their sacred self above all else. Through boundaries, the super empath learns that love, respect, and connection are not things to beg for. They are energies that are naturally drawn to a heart that stands firm, sovereign, and unwavering. Detachment without disconnection is one of the most profound skills a super empath can cultivate. It is not about shutting down your heart, suppressing your emotions, or abandoning empathy. Rather, it is the art of stepping back from the outcomes of someone else's avoidance while remaining fully connected to your own inner truth and purpose. For too long, the empath has allowed another's emotional distance to dictate their own emotional state, shaping their mood, self-worth, and actions according to unpredictable patterns. Detachment is the liberation from this external control, the conscious choice to reclaim ownership of your emotional life without severing the capacity to love. The first step in practicing detachment is understanding the distinction between responsibility and ownership. You are responsible for your own feelings, your actions, and your boundaries. You are not responsible for someone else's emotional availability, responses, or choices. Avoidant partners often create a dynamic in which the empath feels compelled to chase, fix, or manage their distance. Detachment allows you to release the illusion that your love, energy, or attention can fill the void of another's unavailability. It is the recognition that someone else's emotional absence is not a reflection of your inadequacy, but of their limitations. Detachment also involves observing the dynamic without judgment or resistance. Instead of reacting impulsively to withdrawal, criticism, or avoidance, the empath learns to witness it with clarity and composure. This requires a deep level of self-awareness, noticing the stirrings of anxiety, the impulse to chase the desire to seek reassurance, and then consciously choosing a different response. By doing so, you create a space between stimulus and reaction, a sacred pause where power, rather than fear or desperation, guides your actions. This pause is where transformation occurs. It is where the empath shifts from a reactive, enmeshed state to one of conscious, empowered presence. Importantly, detachment does not mean disconnection from your heart. You continue to feel, to care, and to engage authentically, but your emotional equilibrium is no longer dependent on someone else's participation. You learn to hold your love gently, like a lantern, without demanding it be reflected back in the way you hope. You allow connection to exist where it is possible and graciously release it where it is not, without resentment or self-blame. This creates an inner stability that is magnetic, drawing healthy reciprocity while naturally discouraging dynamics that are draining or imbalanced. Practicing detachment also strengthens boundaries. When you are detached, boundaries are no longer reactive or punitive. They are proactive and sacred. You honor your limits without guilt, knowing that enforcing them is a natural extension of loving and valuing yourself. Detachment makes it possible to disengage from manipulative or avoidant behaviors without burning bridges unnecessarily. It teaches the empath that presence does not require sacrificing self-respect, and absence does not require abandoning empathy. Spiritually, detachment without disconnection aligns with the principle of non-attachment. The understanding that love is not possession, that connection is not control, and that your inner peace is sovereign. It is an acknowledgement that true power comes not from influencing others, but from maintaining alignment with your own soul, even when faced with external uncertainty. Detachment cultivates resilience, clarity, and emotional sovereignty, and it allows the empath to engage in relationships from a place of fullness rather than scarcity. Ultimately, detachment without disconnection is liberation. It is the ability to love without losing yourself, to care without overextending, and to be present without surrendering your power. It transforms the dynamic from chasing after someone else's attention to consciously choosing where to place your energy, honoring your needs, and maintaining emotional integrity. The empath discovers that by releasing the compulsive need to control, influence, or fix, they create space for authentic connection, reciprocal love, and profound self-empowerment. Through detachment, the heart remains open and the soul stands sovereign. Healing through self-compassion is the lifeline that restores the super empath after the prolonged weight of emotional neglect. For too long, the empath has extended their heart outward, giving freely, caring deeply, and seeking to nurture someone else's emotional world, often at the expense of their own. The pain of being unseen, unheard, or dismissed can leave deep impressions, an echo that whispers, "Perhaps I am not enough." Self-compassion is the antidote to that quiet, corrosive voice. It is the conscious choice to turn the tender gaze inward, to cradle your own wounds with kindness, understanding, and patience, rather than judgment or self-criticism. Self-compassion begins with acknowledgement. You must first see the emotional strain that has accumulated over years of chasing, overextending, and overgiving. Recognize the ways in which you have tolerated behaviors that diminish your spirit or compromise your well-being. Acknowledge the moments when you bent, diminished, or silenced your needs to accommodate someone else's fear of closeness. This is not a process of blame. It is a process of recognition. By naming these patterns, you honor the reality of your experience and create the first space for healing. Awareness is the foundation upon which compassion is built. Once acknowledged, self-compassion calls for forgiveness, not of the avoidant partner necessarily, but of yourself. Forgive yourself for overextending, for trusting too easily, for seeking love in places where it could not be sustained. Recognize that your past behaviors were acts of courage, expressions of empathy, and attempts to connect with your heart's deepest truth. Self-compassion allows you to release shame and guilt that may have been unconsciously internalized as a result of neglect. It reminds you that being empathetic, loving, and generous is not a weakness, and that your heart's sensitivity is a gift, not a flaw. Healing through self-compassion also involves nurturing yourself intentionally. This is more than occasional indulgence. It is the consistent practice of attending to your emotional, mental, and physical needs. Meditation, journaling, mindful reflection, creative expression, and physical care are all acts of honoring the self. When the empath invests in their own well-being, they replenish the energy that was depleted through years of emotional overextension. They cultivate an internal sanctuary where the heart feels safe, nourished, and seen, independent of external validation. Compassion is reinforced by the cultivation of inner dialogue. Notice the tone with which you speak to yourself, especially in moments of doubt or insecurity. Replace criticism with understanding, impatience with patience, and fear with reassurance. When you feel the pull to chase someone else's attention, gently redirect that energy inward. Ask yourself, what does my heart need right now? How can I honor myself in this moment? This practice not only restores emotional balance, but strengthens the empath's autonomy, making it possible to approach relationships from a place of wholeness rather than scarcity. Spiritually, self-compassion is an acknowledgement of your inherent worth and divinity. It is the recognition that your soul is sacred, that your heart's sensitivity is a reflection of its depth, and that your presence in this world matters. By cultivating self-compassion, the empathetic reconnects with the innate dignity of their being, learning to stand firmly in the truth that love and care begin within. This internal nourishment radiates outward, allowing relationships to be approached with authenticity, presence, and resilience, rather than dependency or desperation. Ultimately, Healing through self-compassion is transformative. It is the bridge between the pain of neglect and the reclamation of power. It teaches the empath that they are not fragile because they feel deeply. They are powerful because they honor that depth. Self-compassion restores balance, strengthens boundaries, and creates a heart that is capable of giving freely without losing itself. Through this practice, the empath learns that they are their own sanctuary, their own source of validation, and their own refuge. Healing becomes not only possible but inevitable when nurtured through patience, love, and the sacred principle that the first and most enduring love must be the one you give to yourself. Transforming the chase into alignment is the ultimate evolution for the super empath who has been entangled with avoidant emotional neglect. For years, the heart has been running after validation, approval, or attention that could never be fully earned. This chase creates an exhausting cycle, one in which energy is depleted, self-worth is questioned, and the natural flow of love becomes distorted. To transform this pattern is to step off the treadmill of seeking and step onto the path of alignment, a path where your actions, intentions, and energy resonate with your inherent worth, rather than the inconsistent responses of someone else. Alignment is the conscious shift from scarcity to abundance, from dependence to sovereignty, from chasing to magnetizing. The first step in this transformation is awareness of the distinction between chasing and alignment. Chasing is born of fear, uncertainty, and unmet needs. It is reactive, exhausting, and often unconsciously habitual. Alignment, by contrast, arises from clarity, self-respect, and a deep understanding of what is genuinely healthy for your heart. It is proactive, intentional, and rooted in the knowledge that your energy is sacred. When you operate from alignment, you no longer bend or stretch to meet someone else's capacity for love. Instead, you move toward relationships, opportunities, and experiences that naturally reflect and honor your worth. Transforming the chase into alignment requires intentional internal work. This includes reinforcing boundaries, cultivating self-compassion, and reclaiming personal power. Each of these practices ensures that your energy is anchored within you, rather than scattered in pursuit of someone else's attention. The empath begins to notice when old patterns of chasing arise, the impulsive need to call, text, or overgive in response to another's distance, and instead chooses a new path, pausing, centering, and realigning with their own truth. This shift is not just behavioral, it is deeply energetic. The heart that once reached outward in desperation now radiates confidence, self-assurance, and magnetic authenticity. Alignment also requires discernment. The super empath learns to recognize relationships that are mutually nourishing versus those that are draining or inconsistent. This discernment is not about judgment or rigid exclusion. It is about honoring the soul's needs and recognizing where emotional reciprocity exists. In doing so, the empath begins to attract connections that naturally reflect their value. Love, respect, and care are no longer pursued with exhaustion. They are drawn to the heart that has learned to stand firm, sovereign, and aligned. The process of alignment is reinforced by the principle of energetic congruence. When your intentions, actions, and self-perception are in harmony, your life begins to mirror that alignment. You no longer chase after someone because your energy communicates completeness and confidence. You no longer compromise your values because your energy communicates integrity and self-respect. Alignment transforms relationships into reflections of your own inner state, abundant, grounded, and authentic. Spiritually, transforming the chase into alignment is an acknowledgement that love is not about scarcity or fear. It is about resonance. It is the understanding that the universe responds to energy and intention, and that when you are aligned with your own truth, you naturally attract experiences, people, and circumstances that honor your heart. This transformation is sacred because it replaces struggle with flow, scarcity with abundance, and depletion with empowerment. Ultimately, transforming the chase into alignment is liberation realized. It is the moment when the super empath steps fully into their power, allowing love and connection to exist naturally without desperation or compromise. It is the understanding that the heart's energy is most potent when it is rooted in clarity, self-respect, and authenticity. Through alignment, the Empath discovers that relationships can be reciprocal, honoring, and deeply nourishing, not because they chase, but because they have cultivated a presence that naturally draws love to them. In this transformation, the heart that once ran tirelessly after approval now moves gracefully toward what is divinely, naturally, and mutually right, creating a life and a love that reflects the profound worth of the soul. Thank you for trusting me with your journey. May your heart always honor its own worth. Goodbye for now. Step boldly into your power and let your light guide the way.